May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The voice of God. Last week, we celebrated the experience of Jesus in the Transfiguration, and we hear the voice of God. This week, we are reminded of Jesus' baptism, and we hear the voice of God. This time, after hearing the voice of God, Jesus goes into the wilderness all by himself. What about that voice? At the Transfiguration moment, Jesus and the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, heard the voice of God say, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." This week, at Jesus' baptism, we assume that both the crowd and Jesus hear the voice of God say, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." For sure, we know that Jesus heard the voice of God. The question is, like Peter, James, and John, or the crowd, do we hear the voice of God? How do we even know that we are hearing God's voice anyway? And what does God's voice sound like? And what is God saying? Does God speak to me directly, or does God speak to me through others? Does God choose to speak to just me, or is God speaking to the community of which I am a part? Well, let's look at Jesus' experience. The gospel reading for today says that after Jesus hears the voice of God, he goes into the desert, the wilderness, by himself. So it would seem to me then that if we are to hear God's voice, then we need to get away from the clatter of life so we can spend some quality time with God. It is said in Matthew's gospel that Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days and that he fasted and was tempted by Satan. Luke's gospel says the same thing. Mark, as in today, only identifies the wilderness and the temptation, but not the length of time. The Gospel of John doesn't even have this story at all. We are used to hearing about Jesus being tempted at the end of the 40 days. 1, to turn stones into bread so he could eat. 2, to throw himself off the pinnacle of the temple and let God save him. And 3, to worship Satan in order to rule over the kingdoms of the world. All 3, Jesus resists. But what happened in the 39 days that led up to that point? Of course, Jesus was in prayer, and Jesus is communing with God. Jesus is asking himself some soul-searching questions like, who am I? And how does he come to his conclusions? This is the interesting part, isn't it? Well, how do we do it? How do we struggle with our identity? How do we know who we are? Self-evaluation, which the 40 days of Lent calls us to, is not an easy task. We must be willing and ready to be honest with ourselves about the kinds of choices we have made in the past and the blessings or fallout that those choices would have accomplished, either for good or for ill. We must be open to emptying ourselves of some preconceived notions and be willing to learn new ways, right? Most of the time, we are pretty convinced that the path we are walking is the right path for us. But what if it is not? How do we know how to change our behavior and our actions, especially if we have been hurting others or even ourselves by the choices that we make? When your cup is full, stop pouring. This expression speaks to me because I assume I already have inside of me everything that I need to face anything that comes my way. Is that arrogance? I don't know. And that means my cup is full. If I come to a place that more is needed or new ideas from somewhere else, like a friend or a new teacher, I will not be able to process anything new because my cup is full. I cannot take anything else in. First, I need to empty myself of my preconceived notions, prejudices, and assumptions. Then I will have room in my mind, my heart, and my soul for new ideas, solutions, and choices that I may not have made had I not let go of my stubborn holding on to some particular limited understandings. Sometimes people that challenge us with new ideas are not trying to bring us down, but they are really trying to lift us up. Or maybe it's God's voice. Think about that the next time your personal beliefs and understandings are challenged either by a situation or by another person's ideas. This is why change does not happen overnight. That is why Lent is 40 days. That is why self-reflection takes longer than a moment. So, my friends, let us use this extended length of time in Lent to have a good long look at ourselves. Are we happy with what we see? Then, try the tools that the period of Lent offers us in order to get more in touch with ourselves and use them to help us grow in faith. Try fasting. Pray more. Ask? Yes, but listen more. Seek forgiveness and reconciliation in areas of our life that we are sorry for. Read the scriptures and meditate on a single phrase that has caught our attention. Read a book that asks some faith questions or tells of a faith journey. Participate in the Lenten study. Give time, give money, give assistance to those in need. Believe me, all of this will help us to discover more about ourselves and our relationship with God. Let us open our hearts and souls to hear the voice of God that calls us beloved, that calls us chosen, precious, loved, worthy. Yes, because we are all God's children now, and we will always be God's children. And as I say to our own children here in the parish, when I make the sign of the cross and impose the ashes on their foreheads on Ash Wednesday, I say to all of us, young and old, remember you are loved of God and will always be loved by God, especially as we have experienced that love through Jesus, who loved us so much that he gave his life so that we may live now in this life and eternally in the life to come. Amen? Amen.